wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his cargo ship toward the massive space station floating in the distance. 7 was one of the biggest stations he had ever seen, with thousands of lights twinkling across its metal surface like stars. The station was so large that it looked like a small city floating in space. "Cargo ship Red Fox, you are cleared for docking bay 7, came a voice through his radio. Could hear the strange accent of the station's alien traffic controller. "Copy that 7. Red Fox coming in," replied, pushing the control stick forward. His small ship moved smoothly toward the station. Had been flying cargo ships for 5 years now, carrying supplies between human colonies and alien worlds. It was not exciting work, but it paid well enough. Today he was delivering medical supplies and food to 7, which served as a neutral meeting place for different alien species. As his ship entered the docking bay, could see other vessels from across the galaxy. There were sleek silver ships from the Empire, dark angular vessels from the Republic, and several others he did not recognize. Today was apparently a big day for diplomatic meetings. Completed the docking process and walked through the airlock into the station. The corridor was busy with beings from many different worlds. Some looked almost human but with blue or green skin. Others were tall and thin with large eyes. A few were covered in scales or fur. Had gotten used to seeing aliens during his travels, but 7 always amazed him with its diversity. He made his way to the cargo office to complete his delivery paperwork. The office was located near the station's diplomatic wing, where the important meetings took place. Through the large windows, could see elegantly dressed aliens walking through the diplomatic corridors. "Just sign here, human," said the cargo supervisor, a short green alien with 4 arms. "Your payment will be transferred to your account within 1 standard hour." Signed the electronic pad and was about to leave when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a deep rumbling noise, followed by what sounded like metal tearing apart. Then the explosion hit. The entire station shook violently, was thrown against the wall as lights flickered and alarms began blaring throughout 7. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the station's computer announced in multiple languages. "Hull breach in diplomatic section 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." Stumbled to his feet and looked out the window toward the diplomatic wing. Smoke and debris were floating in the corridors where he had seen the elegant aliens just minutes before. Through the chaos, he could see figures trapped under fallen ceiling panels and twisted metal beams. "Terrorist attack," gasped the cargo supervisor, his green face pale with fear. "We must get to the escape pods." But was not looking toward the escape pods. His eyes were fixed on something in the diplomatic corridor that made his heart skip a beat. A figure in flowing blue robes was pinned under a massive metal beam. The person was not moving. Had seen enough news reports to recognize the distinctive blue and silver robes of royalty. Someone very important was trapped in there. "The escape pods are this way," called the supervisor, already running toward the emergency exits. Looked back at his own path to safety, then at the trapped figure. The corridor leading to the diplomatic section was filling with smoke, and more debris was falling from the damaged ceiling. Going in there would be extremely dangerous, possibly suicide. He ran toward the diplomatic section. "Human, you are going the wrong way," shouted an alien security guard as pushed past him. The emergency doors were trying to close, but slipped through just before they sealed. The diplomatic corridor was a disaster zone. Broken glass and metal covered the floor, and several small fires burned along the walls. The air was thick with smoke that made his eyes water and his lungs burn. Found the trapped figure halfway down the corridor. It was definitely and definitely female. She had pale blue skin and long silver hair, with features that were both alien and beautiful. Her large dark eyes looked up at him with a mixture of pain and surprise. "You should not be here," she said weakly in accented English. "It is too dangerous." The metal beam across her legs was huge, probably weighing several hundred pounds. Was just a cargo pilot, not a soldier or construction worker. He was 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed about 170 pounds. Moving that beam should have been impossible for him. But did not think about what was possible or impossible. He only thought about the fact that someone needed help. He grabbed the beam with both hands and pulled. Nothing happened. The beam was too heavy and his hands could not get a good grip on the smooth metal. The air around them was getting hotter as fire spread through the corridor. Looked around desperately and saw his emergency toolkit lying where he had dropped it. He pulled out a small crowbar and wedged it under the beam. Using the crowbar as a lever, he pushed down with all his strength. The beam moved slightly. The princess gasped as pressure was relieved from her legs. Almost, grunted, sweat pouring down his face. His muscles were screaming and his hands were bleeding from gripping the rough crowbar, but he kept pushing. Something strange happened then. Felt a surge of strength he had never experienced before. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the alarms, and his whole body felt like it was on fire. Later, he would learn that this was called an adrenaline rush, a human biological response to extreme stress. With a sound like thunder, the beam shifted and rolled away from the princess's legs. But as helped her to her feet, he heard a new sound that filled him with terror. A deep groaning noise was coming from the ceiling above them. More support beams were giving way. "Move!" shouted, pushing the princess toward the emergency exit. They had taken only a few steps when the ceiling collapsed. Threw himself over the princess, covering her body with his own just as tons of burning metal crashed down on top of them. He felt intense heat and pain as jagged pieces of debris tore through his clothes and skin. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the princess looking up at him with those large dark eyes, her expression filled with wonder and something else he could not identify. Then the emergency foam systems activated, and everything disappeared into white silence. Slowly opened his eyes and immediately knew he was not in a hospital. The ceiling above him was made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft purple light. Strange symbols moved across the crystal surface like living writing. The air smelled different, too clean, but with a metallic taste that made him think of copper pennies. He tried to sit up and felt a strange, tingling sensation across his skin. Looking down at his arms, he saw tiny silver dots moving under his skin like microscopic insects. They did not hurt, but watching them made him feel sick to his stomach. "The medical are almost finished with your healing process," said a voice beside him. Turned his head and saw a tall alien in a dark robe standing next to what looked like a medical bed made of the same glowing crystal as the ceiling. The alien had gray skin, no hair, and large black eyes that seemed to take up half of its face. "Where am I?" asked. His voice sounded rough and dry. "You are on Prime, the capital world of the Intergalactic Justice Consortium," the alien replied. "You have been unconscious for 21 of your Earth days while they repaired your injuries." Tried to remember what had happened. Images flashed through his mind. The space station, the explosion, the princess trapped under the beam, the ceiling falling. "The princess," he said quickly. "Is she okay?" "Princess Eth of the Empire survived with minor injuries, thanks to your actions," the alien said. "However, your current situation is more complicated than you might expect." Before could ask what that meant, 2 more aliens entered the room. These were different from the first one. They looked more like humans but were much taller, with blue skin and wearing what appeared to be uniforms. "Of Earth," one of them said in a formal voice. "You are now well enough to stand trial. Please come with us." Trial sat up quickly, ignoring the dizziness that followed. Trial for what? "You will learn everything in the courtroom," the uniformed alien replied. They gave simple gray clothes to wear and led him through corridors that seemed to be carved from one giant crystal. Other aliens walked past them, all different species, all wearing the same serious expressions. Felt like a small insect being carried along by giants. The courtroom was enormous and filled with hundreds of beings from across the galaxy. The ceiling was so high that could not see the top of it, and the walls were covered with displays showing symbols and text in dozens of different languages. In the center of the room was a raised platform where was told to stand. Around him, in a huge circle, were the judges, 12 aliens of different species, each sitting behind curved desks that floated in the air without any visible support. Looked around the courtroom and saw her. Princess Eth was sitting in a section marked for witnesses. She looked exactly as he remembered: pale blue skin, silver hair, and those large dark eyes. But something was different. She was not looking at him. Her eyes were focused on her hands, which were folded in her lap. "Of the planet Earth," announced the largest of the judges, a creature that looked like a cross between a tree and an octopus. "You stand accused of multiple crimes against law." A new alien approached the center of the room. This one was clearly the prosecutor. It wore red robes and carried what looked like a briefcase made of light. The prosecutor had scales instead of skin and yellow eyes that reminded of a snake. "Honored judges," the prosecutor began, "the defendant faces 3 serious charges. First, violation of diplomatic immunity. Second, unauthorized physical contact with imperial royalty. Third, conspiracy to commit assassination." Felt his mouth fall open. "Assassination, I saved her." "Silence," commanded the tree-like judge. "You will have your chance to speak." The prosecutor continued. "The evidence shows that a human cargo pilot deliberately placed himself in a position to make physical contact with Princess Eth during what appeared to be a terrorist attack on 7 Station. Large screens around the courtroom showed video footage of the explosion and rescue. Watched himself lifting the beam and covering the princess as the ceiling collapsed. But the way the prosecutor described it, everything looked suspicious. "Notice how the defendant moves with unusual speed toward the diplomatic section, ignoring multiple escape routes," the prosecutor said, pointing at the screen. "Notice how he possessed the strength to move a metal beam weighing 347 kilograms, despite being a member of a species not known for physical power." More images appeared on the screens. These showed technical data about human physiology, comparing it to other species in the galaxy. According to the data, what had done should have been impossible. "The defendant claims to have acted from compassion," the prosecutor continued. "But we must ask ourselves, why would any rational being risk certain death for a stranger from another species? The only logical explanation is that this was a planned operation." Looked around the courtroom and saw many of the alien observers nodding their heads in agreement. Their faces showed doubt and suspicion when they looked at him. "The prosecution believes that was part of a human conspiracy to infiltrate society," the prosecutor said. "The explosion was arranged to create a situation where could appear to save the princess, thereby gaining her trust and access to imperial secrets." "That's crazy," shouted, but the judges ignored him. The prosecutor turned to face Princess Eth. "Your Highness, please tell the court about your interaction with the defendant during the incident." The princess stood slowly. She was wearing formal court robes that sparkled with tiny lights. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and emotionless. "The defendant did remove the metal beam that was trapping me," she said without looking at. "He did cover me with his body when the ceiling collapsed. That is all I can say with certainty." Stared at her in disbelief. Her testimony was technically true, but it made him sound like a stranger who had barely helped her. There was no mention of the desperate struggle to free her, no description of how he had risked everything to save her life. "Thank you, Your Highness," the prosecutor said with satisfaction. "As you can see, even the alleged victim cannot provide evidence of the defendant's claimed heroic motives." The prosecutor turned back to the judges. "Members of the court, humans are a young and aggressive species. They are known throughout the galaxy for their emotional instability and territorial behavior. It would be foolish to believe that one of them would truly risk his life for an alien princess without some hidden agenda. Felt anger building in his chest. Everything he had done was being twisted into something evil and calculating. The worst part was that the princess, the person he had nearly died saving, was sitting there acting like she barely knew him. The prosecution requests that be found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment on a penal colony, the prosecutor concluded. We cannot allow this human conspiracy to succeed. As the prosecutor returned to his seat, realized how much trouble he was in. He was alone in an alien court, facing judges who did not understand humans, accused of crimes he had never even thought of committing. And the one person who knew the truth about what had really happened was acting like she did not want to help him at all. The second day of the trial began with more evidence against. The prosecutor had brought expert witnesses from different species to explain why his actions were suspicious and probably criminal. The first expert was a named Dr. Han. They looked like large lizards that walked on two legs, with green scales and yellow eyes. Dr. Han wore a collar that translated his hissing speech into words the court could understand. Dr. Han said, in all my behavior, I have never anything like humans. The prosecutor nodded approvingly. Please explain to the court why the defendant's behavior was so unusual. All intelligent life follow the rule, the expert explained. The important, without it a cannot. Every creature will protect before protecting. Dr. Han turned to look at with his cold yellow eyes. But human did he put in deadly danger to from another, every natural law we know. The prosecutor smiled, showing sharp teeth. And what does this suggest about the defendant's true motives? The only logical that he had other for, Dr. Han replied. No being their own without a hidden. Wanted to shout that helping others was normal for humans, but his court-appointed translator had warned him to stay quiet unless the judges gave him permission to speak. The next expert was even worse. Commander Theta 9 was one of the machine race that had replaced their biological bodies with metal and circuits thousands of years ago. The robot looked like a silver skeleton with glowing blue eyes. I have calculated the probability of survival for the defendant's actions, Commander Theta 9 announced in a voice like computer static. Based on the structural damage to 7 Station, the weight of falling debris, and the defendant's physical capabilities, his chance of surviving the rescue attempt was exactly 12.7%. The robot turned its glowing head toward. No rational being would take an action with such a low probability of success unless the potential reward was enormous. The defendant's claim that he acted from compassion is statistically impossible. Impossible? Asked one of the judges. Correct. Compassion is an inefficient emotion that leads to poor decision-making. Advanced species learn to suppress such primitive responses. The fact that humans still experience strong emotional reactions proves they are not ready for galactic citizenship. Felt his anger growing. These aliens were talking about compassion like it was a disease or a weakness. They could not understand that helping others was part of what made humans human. The third expert made things even worse. High Coordinator represented the Collectorate, a species that lived in giant hive minds where individual thoughts were shared by millions of beings. Looked like a tall gray alien with a large brain visible through transparent skin. The defendant's actions were not just irrational, High Coordinator said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They were antisocial. In any proper civilization, important decisions are made by the group, not by individuals acting on emotional impulses. The prosecutor leaned forward with interest. Please elaborate. The defendant claims he acted alone, without consulting his species or government. This proves that humans are dangerously individualistic. They make important decisions based on personal feelings rather than collective wisdom. High Coordinator's large eyes fixed on. Such behavior is typical of primitive species that have not yet learned to think beyond their own limited perspectives. The defendant probably caused the explosion himself, then staged a rescue to make humans look heroic while secretly gathering intelligence about technology. Could not stay quiet anymore. "That's not true," he shouted, jumping to his feet. "I just wanted to help her." "Silence," commanded the lead judge, slamming what looked like a crystal hammer. "The defendant will not speak out of turn." But the damage was done. The alien observers in the courtroom were murmuring among themselves and could see the suspicion in their eyes growing stronger. The prosecutor was clearly pleased. As you can see, the defendant displays exactly the kind of emotional instability and disrespect for authority that makes humans dangerous to galactic peace. The prosecutor activated a large display screen that showed footage of Earth's history. The images were not flattering. Wars, pollution, violence, and conflict filled the screen. "Humans have only been in space for a few hundred years," the prosecutor continued, "but their planet's history is full of violence and aggression. They fight wars over resources, territory, and even ideas. They destroy their own environment and kill their own species." More images appeared, showing human weapons and military forces. This is a species that solves problems with force. They are emotional, unpredictable, and dangerous. The defendant's actions at 7 fit perfectly with human patterns of behavior. The prosecutor pointed at. The defendant did not save Princess Eve from compassion. He saved her because humans are planning to expand into space, and they needed a way to gain the princess's trust. The explosion was part of an elaborate human plot to infiltrate the Empire. Looked around the courtroom desperately. Every face he saw looked convinced by the prosecutor's arguments. Even the judges seemed to believe that humans were too dangerous and primitive to be trusted. His only hope was Princess Eve. She had been there. She had seen what really happened. She knew he was telling the truth. But when looked at the princess, she was still staring at her hands. She had not looked at him once during the entire trial. Her face showed no expression at all, as if she was thinking about something completely different. The prosecutor called the princess to testify again. "Your Highness, after hearing the expert testimony, do you have anything to add about the defendant's behavior during the incident?" Princess Eve stood slowly and walked to the center of the courtroom. She was surrounded by floating microphones that would carry her words to every corner of the vast chamber. "I can only repeat what I said yesterday," she said in the same flat, emotionless voice. "The defendant removed the debris that was trapping me. He covered me when the ceiling collapsed. Beyond these facts, I cannot speculate about his motives." Felt his heart sink. She was not lying, but she was not telling the whole truth either. She was not mentioning how desperately he had struggled to free her, or how he had risked his own life without any thought of reward. Her testimony made him sound like a stranger who had provided minimal assistance. "Thank you, Your Highness," the prosecutor said with satisfaction. "The prosecution rests its case." As the princess returned to her seat, realized that he was completely alone. The experts had convinced the court that his actions were impossible and suspicious. The princess, who could have saved him with a few honest words, had chosen to remain silent. Tomorrow, he would have to defend himself against charges that could result in life imprisonment. He would have to convince a courtroom full of aliens that human compassion was real, not some elaborate conspiracy. And he would have to do it without any help from the person whose life he had saved. Spent the entire night trying to figure out how to defend himself. The translator device had given him access to legal documents, but they were written in complicated alien language that made his head hurt. Most of the laws seemed designed for species that thought very differently than humans. The aliens on the legal committee had offered him a defender, but every lawyer they suggested specialized in defending criminals. They all assumed he was guilty and just wanted to argue for a lighter sentence. Decided he would rather represent himself than have someone who did not believe in his innocence. When the third day of the trial began, stood alone in the center of the courtroom. The prosecutor looked confident and relaxed. The judges seemed bored, as if they had already made up their minds. The alien observers in the gallery were talking quietly among themselves, probably discussing what his punishment should be. "Of Earth," announced the lead judge, "you may now present your defense." Took a deep breath. He had thought about making a long speech about human nature and the importance of helping others, but looking at all those alien faces, he realized that words alone would not be enough. They needed to understand something that could not be explained with logic or evidence. "Honored judges," began, "I know that my actions seem impossible to you. I know that the experts have given you good reasons to think I am lying. But I want you to understand something about humans that you might not know." Looked around the courtroom, trying to make eye contact with as many beings as possible. "We do not help others because we expect rewards. We do not calculate probabilities before we act. When we see someone in danger, something inside us makes us want to help, even if it puts us in danger too." One of the judges, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish, made a sound like laughter. "That is exactly what the prosecution warned us about. Humans act on emotion instead of reason. This proves you are too primitive for galactic society." Felt his frustration growing, but he tried to stay calm. "Maybe we are emotional. Maybe we do not think like you do. But that does not make us evil or dangerous. It just makes us different." "Different in a way that threatens stability," interrupted the prosecutor. "The defendant's own words prove that humans cannot be trusted to make rational decisions." Was about to respond when something unexpected happened. A clear, strong voice cut through the courtroom like a bell. "That is enough." Everyone turned to look at Princess Eth. She was standing up in the witness section, her blue skin glowing slightly with what had learned was a sign of strong emotion in. Her large, dark eyes were no longer looking at her hands. They were focused directly on the judges. "Your Highness," said the lead judge, "you are not scheduled to testify again today." "I do not care about the schedule," the princess replied firmly. "I have listened to 3 days of lies and half-truths, and I will not remain silent any longer." The prosecutor quickly stood up. "Your Highness, with respect, you have already given your testimony. The court's procedures do not allow for." "I am Princess Eth, daughter of Emperor, heir to the throne," she said, her voice rising. "I do not need your permission to speak the truth." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the floating microphone seemed to stop humming, stared at the princess in amazement. This was not the same quiet, distant person who had been avoiding his eyes for 3 days. Princess Eth walked to the center of the courtroom and stood next to. For the first time since he had awakened, she looked directly at him. Her expression was full of regret and determination. "I have not been telling you the complete truth," she announced to the court. "Not because I wanted to lie, but because my advisors told me that sharing certain information might damage diplomatic relations with other species." The prosecutor looked alarmed. "Your Highness, I must protest. You cannot simply—" "Silence," the princess commanded, and her voice carried such authority that the prosecutor actually stepped backward. She turned to address the judges. "You have heard experts explain why actions were impossible and suspicious. You have been told that no rational being would risk their life for a stranger. But these experts are wrong because they do not know what I know." The princess touched a control on her wrist, and a new type of display screen appeared in the air above the courtroom. This one showed brain scans and neural activity patterns that pulsed with different colors. "Possess limited telepathic abilities," she explained. "We can sense the emotions and surface thoughts of other beings when we are in physical contact with them. This is why unauthorized touching of royalty is normally forbidden. It creates an involuntary mental connection. Felt his heart begin to race. He remembered the moment when he had touched the princess's hand to help her stand up after moving the beam. During the rescue, the princess continued, and I were in physical contact for several minutes. This created a telepathic link between us. I experienced his thoughts and emotions as if they were my own. The prosecutor looked panicked now. Your Highness, surely you cannot expect the court to believe. I am not asking you to believe anything, the princess interrupted. I am going to show you. She touched another control, and the display screen changed. Now it showed recordings from her own neural implants, actual thoughts and memories from the rescue on 7. Watched in amazement as the screen displayed his own mind from the princess's perspective. The court could see his exact thoughts during those crucial moments. The immediate decision to help when he saw her trapped, the desperate determination to move the beam, the instinctive need to protect her when the ceiling began to collapse. Most importantly, they could see that there were no hidden motives, no secret plans, no calculations about reward or benefit. There was only pure, simple compassion for another being in danger. As you can see, the princess said, was not thinking about politics or conspiracies or gaining access to secrets. He was thinking about one thing, helping someone who needed help. The courtroom was absolutely silent. The alien observers stared at the screen in fascination and confusion. The judges looked at each other uncertainly. The princess was not finished. The experts told you that strength was impossible for a human. They were wrong about that too. During our telepathic connection, I experienced what humans call an adrenaline rush, a biological response that temporarily increases physical abilities during times of extreme stress. She turned to look at Dr. Han, the expert. You said that no being would act against their survival instinct, but you do not understand the human survival instinct. For humans, sometimes protecting others is more important than protecting themselves. The princess faced Commander Theta 9 next. You calculated that his actions had only a 12.7% chance of success, but was not thinking about percentages. He was thinking about the fact that someone needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. Finally, she looked at High Coordinator. You said that his individual decision-making was dangerous and antisocial, but the ability to act quickly and independently in an emergency is exactly what saved my life. If he had stopped to consult with others, I would be dead. The princess turned back to the judges. I have remained silent for 3 days because my government believed it would be better for relations if this incident was minimized. They thought it would be easier if humans remained seen as an unpredictable species, rather than acknowledging that we owe a debt to one of them. Her voice grew stronger. But I will not let an innocent being be punished for saving my life. Is not a criminal or a conspirator. He is simply a human who did what humans do when they see someone in danger he helped. The princess turned to, and for the first time in 3 days, smiled at him. And for that, I owe him not just my life, but my eternal gratitude. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs as Princess Eth returned to her seat, stood in the center of the room, hardly believing what had just happened. The person he had saved had finally spoken up for him. Now he had to hope that it would be enough. The judges spent 2 hours discussing Princess Eth's testimony, could see them through the transparent walls of their meeting chamber, their various alien forms moving around each other as they debated. Some of them seemed angry, waving their arms or tentacles in animated gestures. Others appeared thoughtful, staring at data displays that showed the neural recordings from the princess. When the judges finally returned to the courtroom, their expressions were impossible to read. The lead judge, the tree-like being called Arbiter On, took several long moments to arrange his papers before speaking. In my 4,000 years serving this court, Arbiter On began, I have never encountered a case quite like this one. The evidence presented by both sides forces us to reconsider some of our basic assumptions about intelligent behavior. Felt his hands trembling as he waited for the verdict. The prosecution has argued convincingly that the defendant's actions were illogical and therefore suspicious. The defense has provided evidence that the defendant's species operates under different behavioral patterns than most galactic civilizations. The arbiter turned his large eyes toward. Of Earth, this court finds you innocent of all charges. The courtroom exploded in noise. Some aliens cheered, others seemed shocked, and a few appeared angry. Felt his knees go weak with relief. He was free. But Arbiter On was not finished. However, he continued, raising one of his branch-like arms for silence, this case has revealed a larger issue that this court must address. The noise died down as everyone waited to hear what the judge would say next. Princess Eth's testimony has shown us something we have never encountered in millions of years of galactic civilization. Humans appear to possess a trait that most species either never developed or have lost through evolution: the ability to consistently choose the welfare of others over their own survival. The arbiter's voice grew more serious. This trait could make humans either the galaxy's greatest asset or its greatest threat. A species that acts on emotion rather than logic could cause chaos in our carefully balanced relationships. Felt his heart sink. Were they going to punish all of humanity because of what he had done? Therefore, the arbiter continued, this court orders that humanity be placed on galactic observation status. Human colonies and trade routes will be monitored, and human actions will be closely studied. The prosecutor looked pleased with this decision, but the arbiter was still speaking. However, this observation is not being implemented because we consider humans to be a threat. It is being implemented because we believe they may represent something new and valuable in galactic civilization. The arbiter looked directly at. You will serve as the first human cultural representative to the Galactic Council. Your job will be to help other species understand human behavior and to help humans understand how to interact peacefully with other civilizations. Could hardly believe what he was hearing. Instead of being punished, he was being offered an important job. Princess Eth stood up in the witness section. Honored arbiter, if I may speak. Of course, Your Highness. I would like to propose the creation of what I will call the Protocol, a new addition to galactic law that recognizes acts of selfless protection as the highest form of honor between species. The princess walked to the center of the courtroom again, risked his life to save someone he had never met from a species he barely knew with no expectation of reward. This should not be seen as suspicious behavior. It should be celebrated as the best example of what intelligent beings can become. Several of the judges were nodding now. Even some of the alien observers in the gallery seemed impressed by the princess's words. I propose that the protocol establish formal procedures for recognizing and rewarding acts of heroism, the princess continued, and I volunteer to serve as advisor as he learns to navigate galactic politics. Arbiter On considered this for a moment. The court accepts both proposals. The protocol will be drafted and submitted to the Galactic Council for approval. Princess Eth will serve as cultural liaison between the Empire and the new human representative. 6 months later, stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt 7 station, watching ships from dozens of different species dock peacefully at the massive structure. The station had been reconstructed as a symbol of cooperation, with a special wing dedicated to studying and promoting acts of heroism between different civilizations. Princess Eth joined him at the window. She was no longer wearing formal court robes, but simple traveling clothes that allowed her to move freely around the station. Over the past months, she had become not just his advisor, but his friend. The morning reports show 3 more incidents where beings from different species helped each other in dangerous situations, she said, holding up a data pad. 2 involved humans, but one was who saved a drowning aquarian despite the fact that their species have been enemies for centuries. Smiled, maybe it's catching on. The protocol has been adopted by 47 different civilizations so far, the princess continued, and the Empire has established formal peaceful trade relations with Earth. My father says it's the most positive diplomatic development in his lifetime. Looked out at the busy docking bays. Human ships were arriving regularly now, carrying not just cargo but also diplomats, scientists, and cultural exchange students. The galaxy was slowly opening up to his species. "Do you ever regret speaking up for me at the trial?" asked. "Your advisors were pretty angry about it." Princess Eth laughed, a musical sound that still amazed. "My advisors thought I should be more concerned with politics than with truth, but watching you risk your life for a complete stranger taught me something important about what kind of leader I want to be." She turned to face him. "Besides, if I had not spoken up, you would be in prison right now, and none of this would have happened. The galaxy would have missed out on learning about human compassion." A new ship was approaching the station, a sleek vessel that recognized as belonging to the collective. Commander Theta 9 had requested a meeting to discuss the mathematical implications of emotionally driven decision-making. Even the machine race was beginning to understand that there might be value in what they had once dismissed as primitive behavior. "You know what the strangest part is," said. "When I saw you trapped under that beam, I never thought about any of this. I just thought someone needed help." "That's exactly why it matters," the princess replied. "You didn't save me because you wanted to become an ambassador or change galactic politics. You saved me because helping people is just what humans do." Nodded, watching another human ship dock at the station. "I guess that's not such a bad thing to be known for." As the station's lights reflected off the ships from 100 different worlds, realized that sometimes the smallest actions could have the biggest consequences. He had risked his life for one person, and that single act of compassion had opened a door between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The universe was a vast and complicated place, full of species that thought and acted in ways humans might never fully understand. But perhaps that was okay. Perhaps what the galaxy needed was not more logic or calculation, but simply more beings who were willing to help when help was needed. And if humans could teach that lesson to the stars, then maybe they had found their true purpose among the civilizations of the galaxy.